Hello, everybody. This is Charles Lincoln again, and hopefully we'll now get started with Sam Dickson in person. Anyhow, in my opinion, the McMichael decision really reflects a brand new low in American justice. And so that is why I think it's important to discuss it on the same day. I think we'll be discussing this decision for a long time to come, but it is without doubt a shocking development for the reasons that I was reading a few minutes ago about the fact that basically these were deputies. These were men authorized to enforce the law with significant law enforcement experience. And Sam Dickson has arrived. Sam Dickson.
Hey.
It's good to see the two of you. Hang on, what happened? Yeah, he brought a cat. Okay, that was weird. Gray cat.
All right.
Hello, hello.
Hey.
Who is your feline friend there?
All right. Huh?
Who is your feline friend there?
Oh, that's Smokey the cat. You can see him. I can't see him in what I can see here.
I could see him a second ago.
He's a difficult cat.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay. Well, everybody, today is, Sam, do you know what tomorrow is, by the way?
Well, the 23rd of February. I don't know. What is it?
It's
Abraham Lincoln's birthday or something?
No, it's the second anniversary of Ahmaud Arbery's death day.
Oh, well.
And the first anniversary of the filing of the civil case and the criminal case.
Well, to him, the kingdom of heaven.
So, okay. I mean, it strikes me as amazing that they handed this verdict down the day before the second anniversary, and that everything seems to be proceeding in kind of some sort of lockstep, as if it was preordained. That may be more cynical than is warranted, but you're a Georgia lawyer. Can you tell me and the audience what is really going on here?
Well, I don't think you have to be from Georgia, and you don't have to be a lawyer to see what's going on. As I've said many times, our enemies have dropped all the pretenses with which they used to try to inveigle young people to subvert them. When I was in high school and college, these people claimed that they were in favor of the rights of the accused. They were in favor of a racially neutral country and law system. They were for peace. They were against the military-industrial complex. They were for civil liberties, and they were against the FBI, and on and on and on. All of those things are now reversed. They're contemptuous of the rights of the accused. They love wars. They love the military. They love the FBI. They love the CIA. They have contempt for the Bill of Rights. So this is all good for us. It has exposed them, and thoughtful people will see through them, and they will lose support among thoughtful people. But what they're doing is they're acting out all of the hatred they have towards the founding stock of America and related nationalities from Europe. These people hate us, and they look for pretexts to whip up mob frenzy. And they have whipped up a lynch mob frenzy against the McMichaels in Brunswick.
If you were to get a little bit more specific, how does this fit in with sort of abolish the police uh, advocacy of 2020. I mean, the McMichaels, as I understand it, at least the dad was a former policeman, Gregory McMichaels, and he was a former member of the police department, and they totally trusted him. And I was just reading from the civil complaint a minute ago, and it was basically saying that when this first happened, they called the police immediately. The McMichaels did, and the police came out and basically didn't find anything wrong. Do you think is there any chance that the later prosecution was staged as part of the movement to abolish the police?
No, I think it had the purpose was primarily to incite the hatred of Blacks toward white Americans, to enhance their group solidarity, to energize them, and to create another guilt trip for whites who are susceptible to psychological warfare. To the extent that they were able to dig in at the police, that's just sort of serendipity. That's a little gravy that came with it, but I don't think that was the purpose. The purpose was quite obvious. They want to show what happens to whites who try to protect their own neighborhoods.
And so, what about what you just said about did you say a racially neutral society, a race-free society?
Well, that was the pretense. When King was marching, and I remember as a child hearing them say, all they want is a chance. They just want an equal chance. That disappeared within 2 years, within 4 years of the Civil Rights Movement's victory in the Civil Rights Bill of 1964. Richard Nixon created affirmative action. People forget that was a gift of Richard Nixon to the white race. Explicit discrimination against white people, open, official, noted, notorious discrimination in a way that had not existed even in the days of segregation. The segregationists did not go around by law commanding businesses not to employ Black people. But that's what Nixon did. That he had all these suits from his Justice Department that you may not hire white people. You've got to hire Black people. You've got to have, if 30% of the population is Black, your workforce has to be 30% Black. And then after that, it was your executives. Now it's your executives have to be 30% Black, and on and on and on. And anyway, that was the pretense, though. And I remember hearing a lot of white people say, "Oh, all they want is a chance," And I think the thinking among a lot of whites was, "Well, give them this, and the problem will be over." I think most people thought that, but the problem will never be over, because what we have in America are different nations struggling for mastery over the same space within our territorial boundaries. We don't have a single nation. We never have had a single nation. Given the demographic makeup of our people, it's impossible to have a single nation. A nation consists of people like African Americans, they're a nation. Hispanics, they're a nation. White European Christians are a nation. The Jewish people in America, they're a nation. And that's what the real nations are. And just as in Turkey, during and after World War I, it was impossible for the Armenian nation and the Turkish nation to live in the same area of Asia Minor and Anatolia. So it's impossible in this country for all these diverse nations, especially the ones that are being revved up with hatred of the white nation, to live in the same country. And that's why the country will eventually crash on the rocks and the ship will fall apart.
What would you think what is the next step for Georgia? I mean, what can possibly happen at this stage? I mean, if I were living in your state, this would make me extremely nervous, right? I would feel like I don't belong here. I mean, how do you feel? Do you feel that you belong in Georgia?
Well, in a way I do, in a way I don't. I've never felt the identification that most native-born Georgians feel, because personally, I'm the first member of my family to be born out of South Carolina, outside of South Carolina for centuries. And when we would go home to visit our relatives, I say home to South Carolina, I always felt that's where I belonged. But I've stayed here all my life. But yeah, I think it's a clear message to white Georgians that the protection of the law doesn't exist for them anymore. And the message is the same for all Americans. The law system in America is simply a fraud. And that's been my conclusion from practicing law.
I didn't understand the word you said. The loss of what is, do you say a
Fraud. The American judicial system is so unfair and so corrupt on a systemic institutional basis that the whole system is a fraud. They compel American children to recite thousands of times in the course of growing up the pledge about liberty and justice for all. And that's just a lie. There isn't liberty and justice for all. There is overlordship for a coalition of minority racists. And that's the way it has been virtually all of my life, all the way back to the 1950s. That's well into the 1950s and before. That's how America has really functioned. And so it's a fraud on so many levels. We're here to talk about the specific case of the McMichaels, but the fraud of American law is systemic. It extends throughout all states and all courts at all levels. And it's a cake with a number of layers to it. If we were to take time to go through it, I can walk people through what is wrong with the legal system.
Could you do it with regard to the McMichael case? Because as I say, this case is really having it. It goes to my heart, because basically I feel like these people, the McMichaels and their friend, they were very normal, good, upright people, and they are basically being treated. I mean, they've now got 2 life sentences.
Yeah, a normal race of people would be doing what the blacks did after the scenes of George Floyd's arrest and detainment were played. But white people won't do that because they are inert. They've had the manliness bred out of them, and they're all following a strategy of personal survival by looking out for number one. But this kind of oppression has historically provoked reaction. And the most amazing thing about America is not the oppression, it's the lack of appropriate reaction by the white population. If Black people saw a railroad job like this, a corrupt court like this, they would be held to play. But when we saw with the acquittal of O.J. Simpson, did whites go out and riot when a racist Black jury acquitted O.J. Simpson? Did whites in Atlanta, in the north part of Atlanta, did they form mobs of 4,000 or 5,000 and go into the Black areas of South Atlanta and loot and burn and attack people night after night after night, as happened here in the wake of George Floyd and so forth? No, there was no place in America where whites fought. And yet whites are accused of being terrorists, they're racist. All of these things are attributed to white people that we aren't. And the attributions are done by people who are everything they accuse us of being.
What are the white people? I mean, I assume you have talked to people about McMichael today. What are people saying? I mean, other lawyers, other business people in Atlanta, what are people saying?
Well, lawyers are basically cowardly, and they're scared, and they don't talk. We're witnessing stuff in our profession that it surprises even me, who had a rather low opinion of our profession and of the courts. But the white lawyers are not going to talk. White lawyers are not going to give any leadership. White lawyers will go along, as they have for generations. They're all looking out for themselves, as white people do. There's no teamwork. They don't feel the sense of loyalty that Rosa Parks felt to her community. With white people, most lawyers would get up and they would give their seats up, or they would even more happily help Blacks make other white people give up their seats. so long as they could ingratiate themselves with judges and increase their firm's revenues. So you can expect nothing from most white lawyers. The white lawyers I know, of course, are a subset of people who listen to things like this podcast, and they get information, real information, the information that the establishment and the system calls false information, the real information, and they seek to censor out. So they're outraged, they're furious, but there are very few of those lawyers. Very, very few.
So
I'll give you another example outside the McMichael thing. In around March of 2021, 8 members of the appellate courts in Georgia, 8 judges, signed their names to a statement in support of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. And that statement said that it was occasioned and caused by the murder of George Floyd. Now, I suspect that 95% of the lay people listening to this podcast have heard and know that you're not supposed to call and say that an accused person is guilty of a crime. You're not supposed to do that. My mother and father reproved me for saying things like that. But now, appellate court judges will sign their names to something judging someone guilty, that cop up in Minneapolis, before he's even had a trial, and telling the public that he's guilty of murder. There was not one peep from the legal community in Georgia, not a single judge, not a law periodical, not a lawyer. No one criticized this gross violation of proper behavior by the leading judges in our state.
specifically that, if I remember correctly, that is an express violation of the Code of Judicial Canons of Judicial Ethics, isn't it? For
I don't know. It certainly would be if they were a judge actually trying the case, but I'm not sure that an action like that by judges in a foreign state would be that. But it's inappropriate. It goes against the commonly known principles of American criminal law. But that I could go on. Here's another example. Nationwide, there is an organized drive to punish lawyers who represented President Trump in challenging the vote results. Now, I voted for Trump, but I am not a blind follower of President Trump, and I have a lot of problems with the claim that the votes were stolen, at least the way it's been framed. But, here again, the principle, I remember as a little boy hearing my parents, as properly educated and decent middle-class Americans, saying around the table, if they had a dinner party and somebody criticized a lawyer in Atlanta, he's representing that child rapist. And my parents and their friends would say, you can't judge a lawyer by whom he represents, and everyone has a right under the Bill of Rights to a lawyer. That's what I heard when I was 8 years old at my parents' table. But that's not what you hear today. And the media, the system media, revels in this. We get legal media, those of us who are lawyers, we get legal media, and they reported this here in Atlanta. We have a legal publication, and they jubilantly followed efforts to get a lawyer, I think he was actually Jewish, a young lawyer, fired from his firm because he was a retainer lawyer for the Republican Party, and he listened in at the hearing on the vote fraud case. He wasn't even counsel of record. His name wasn't on the pleadings. He wasn't heard. He simply used a Zoom meeting like what we're talking on to listen. And they eventually got him fired. There's an outfit called the Lincoln Project of Never Trumpers. They appear on National Public Radio, and the National Public Radio journalists gleefully report the latest work of the Lincoln Project in trying to financially ruin and crush and socially ostracize lawyers and their families who represented Trump. And I have not seen a single peep from any legal ethics professor, any law school, any law publication, any lawyer, any bar association on this subject. Not one word of opposition. If someone tried this on a lawyer who represented the Communist Party or the Man-Boy Love Association or NOW, they would all be appearing. How horrible, how shocking this is that this lawyer is being attacked because he represented them. But it's just another example. Your listeners all know this. They're all thought criminals like me. They're all people who have given up on the American system. If they haven't given up on the American system, they need to pull the plug now. There is no justice in our courts. There is no fairness in our courts. Just accept it, that you do not live in a country with liberty and justice for all. You do. If you go to court, you're not going to get justice.
Those are strong words.
They are strong. I may very well be punished by my profession for this, but I've been the subject of attacks before, and I'm old now, and I have decided one of my New Year's resolutions is that I will never again file another lawsuit in any court for anybody at any time, anywhere. I'm through with it. I've paid my dues, and I'm now totally retired from the field of law.
Well, that's pretty interesting. But so what do you suggest people do?
Stay out of court. I have a young fellow here in Atlanta that emailed me again today. I've talked to him on several occasions and tried to explain to him how the courts work. But he sent me an email today that he wants me to tell him how he and his father can go about filing a suit for defamation against someone. The guy's not listening to me, but I tell people over and over again, stay out of court. Do not go there voluntarily. Do not subject yourself to a court and a judge in this country. And do not, and there are ways you can secede. Surprisingly, up until very recently, the system was encouraging what they called alternative dispute resolution. And you can put in your contracts and your leases and things like this, provisions of compulsory arbitration, and you can get away from the courts and get away from the fixed system. And I suggest to people they should do that. They should have compulsory arbitration provisions in their commercial paperwork. But you don't subject yourself voluntarily to going there. That's very dangerous.
And of course, the McMichaels did not voluntarily submit themselves.
No, that was a criminal action. But there are other people who have. There are people who have filed libel suits, like this young fellow here in Atlanta wants to do. You can forget that. The Atlanta papers libeled me a couple of years ago. They have a little reporter who is a social justice warrior. The Atlanta Antifa have his name and email address up and urge their people to contact him and send him information. They regard him as being that friendly. But he ran a column and he described me as an avowed white supremacist. Well, I have never, that implies that I have used that term for myself. If he wants to put his credibility behind a claim that I'm a white supremacist, he has a First Amendment right to do so. I'm a civil libertarian, a real one, and not the phony ones like we see on the left. I think editorial comments, okay. If some right winger wants to shred his credibility by saying Hillary Clinton is a Marxist because she believes in equality, I think he has the right to say that. But you don't have the right to say Hillary Clinton is an avowed communist. You don't have that right. But I contacted him and he basically told me to go to hell. And then I got a call from a powerhouse law firm in Atlanta telling me that they were not going to retract it. And that was that. And I made the sensible decision. I wasn't about to sue the state's largest daily newspaper against one of its entrenched big firms in a system court. But other people have tried it. Our good friend James Edwards tried it. He was naive enough to believe that as an American citizen, he could go to court and get justice. You may know about that case.
James Edwards of
political cesspool. The Detroit News in Michigan stated, as a matter of fact, that James Edwards was a leader of the Ku Klux Klan. James Edwards is not now, nor never has been, a member of the Ku Klux Klan, and he certainly has never been a leader of the Ku Klux Klan. He has never attended a Klan meeting. So he got together with a very fine lawyer, excellent lawyer, whom I have boundless admiration. But he also was a young fellow, younger than James, and he also, I believe, at some idealistic part of his brain, despite having caught on to being red-pilled about a lot of things and black-pilled toward the American system, he still believed that something this indefensible would bring about a just result from the courts. Well, no, the trial court rendered a decision. They dismissed their complaint. They were lucky not to have to pay attorney's fees to the opposing side. But the trial judge reasoned, this jurist said that you can be a leader of something and not be a member and not even know it. You can say something that influences them, and in this way, you lead them. So I guess somebody could be associated with the Unabomber because they could have led the Unabomber by writing an article about environmental pollution. Of course, they would never rule that. They would rule it differently. Anyway, these two idealistic friends of ours then said, well, we're going to take this to the court of the appellate courts. We're going to go to the supreme fountain of justice in the state of Michigan. And it was affirmed. Not only was it affirmed, but the three justices writing the decision went outside the transcript and they found more evidence why it was okay to claim that James Edwards was a leader of the Klan. And I was that evidence. They said, well, he has had Sam Dickson on, and he's a known member of the Ku Klux Klan. And as people used to say to the House committee, I will testify, I am not now, nor never have been, a member of the Ku Klux Klan. Even the Southern Poverty Center, our enemy's equivalent of QAnon, except QAnon has more credibility, even the SPLC has never claimed that I am a member of the Ku Klux Klan. But these judges could claim that, and they could happily sign their disgusting names to this outrageous injustice and have it published as a decision of an American court. If James Edwards and his lawyer could not get justice on those facts, what on earth induces this foolish, idealistic young white boy to think he can go to a court and get justice from an American judge? You can't do that. If you have a little more chance, there are some good judges. I don't deny that, and I have seen some good and courageous judges. But by and large, in most areas of America, in front of most judges, you have about as much chance of getting justice as an Orthodox priest did getting justice from the courts in Moscow in 1937 under Joseph Stalin. The only difference being is that Stalin was not hypocritical. He told the truth. Everyone knew what the system was, whereas we have to recite with liberty and justice for all.
Well, okay, let's look at the other side. You said that you don't ever want to file a lawsuit again, and that you don't think anybody should. Have you heard of a Georgia attorney by the name of J. Kyle Califf?
What's his name?
J. Kyle Califf, Califf.
No, I have not.
Have you heard of McEldrew, Young, Purtell, and Merritt, or a lawyer named S. Lee Merritt?
No, I have not heard of him either.
Okay, well, actually, they're in Philadelphia, actually. So
that's why I would not have heard of them.
Okay, sorry. I was just reading. I mean, because I sent you earlier today when I was asking you to appear tonight, this lawsuit, which a first amended complaint was filed today, 48 pages long, against the McMichaels. And the Georgia lawyer from Augusta is J. Kyle Califf. And he is listed as the lead. James Kyle Califf is listed as the lead counsel, and he's got this firm from Philadelphia, McEldrew, Young, Purtell, and Merritt. And I have heard of the firm of Reed Smith, LLP, from Washington, D.C., It's not quite what they call a white shoe firm, but it's a big nationwide law firm, and the attorney there is Rizwan Qureshi, and obviously part of the original American stock we were talking about. There were many Qureshis at the Constitutional Convention, as I'm sure you're aware. And then there's something called the Roderick and Solange MacArthur Justice Center. Now, these people have filed a lawsuit. Let's see, their demand is in excess of $1 million. They don't specify an amount, but they say it's in excess of $1 million, including interest, delay damages, whatever that is, cost of suit, general and specific damages, including survival and wrongful death damages, punitive and exemplary damages as provided by law. They obviously think that they've got a good reason to be in court. And the people who sued up in Charlottesville, I forget which firm that was, but consortium of firms, but they obviously thought that they had a very good reason to file lawsuits, and they'll probably file more. So how do you, if you end up being on the answering side of a suit like this and you're not in jail? I mean, I don't know how Travis McMichael, Gregory McMichael, William Bryan, and Robert Rash are going to come up with multiple millions in damages. And so I mean, you know, they're plainly not what you'd call deep pocket defendants.
Aren't they suing the police department and the former district attorney also?
Let's see. They list one police officer, but they're suing Glenn County, Jackie Johnson. Who is Jackie Johnson?
She's the former district attorney who is now being prosecuted because she took 4 days to recuse herself after the death of Arbery, and our Republican Attorney General Christopher Carr says that this was an insult to Arbery's parents, his mother, because she didn't act faster than 4 days in recusing herself. She had to recuse herself because one of the McMichaels used to work for her department, so that was a legal thing. But 4 days wasn't fast enough. And this is a chance for Chris Carr to get a photo op. And that's the Republican opposition that the people of Georgia will be allowed to vote for in November of this year. You'll get to choose whether or not to get that good Republican back in office. So there is no reform of this system. That is my message to your listeners. The time for reform was 3 generations ago. You know, by the time of the 1964 election, Gore versus Johnson, the chance for reform was probably over, and it's certainly over now. All we can do, our job, is to make Caucasian Americans aware that this is not their country, it is not their system, and they have to find a way out, hopefully as peaceful as it can be, but they cannot go on believing the government of this country and its news media and its system and its FBI and things like that. They have to realize these people are their enemies. They have to pull the plug.
Okay, how do you go about pulling the plug? I mean, I hear so many people in our movement talk about ethnostates and separation, but I don't hear any step-by-step, inch-by-inch proposals for how to achieve this. In Georgia, should the state of Georgia be split between black and white, for instance? I mean, I know you've got a huge Hispanic population there too. How could you resolve the problem even in Georgia? Georgia's like a middling large state. It's not not as big as Florida or Texas or California, but it's not as small as Vermont or Rhode Island either. What should Georgia do?
Well, I think that you may have to consign all of Georgia to be part of another racist ethnostate. Yeah, the problem we have in America, to put it in a different perspective, what you're talking about is that we are celebrating diversity all over our country. When it became apparent that Yugoslavia could not survive, the bastard state created by Woodrow Wilson and the American State Department in World War I and recreated at gunpoint at the end of World War II, could only be kept together under the iron heel of communism. And when the iron heel of communism was removed by the collapse of the communist regime, the various nations that had been under that iron rule became nations again. Slovenia became a nation, Croatia became a nation, Serbia became a nation, and so on. Slovenia withdrew with only one casualty. There were more in Croatia because there was a part of that country was mixed, and there were fewer in Serbia. Where the bloodshed took place was in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And the reason for that was they were celebrating diversity. As an example of how diversity is not a strength, but is a deadly weakness. Because in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Muslims, the Roman Catholic Croatians, and the Orthodox Serbians were all spread around. They all lived in villages near each other, and they all had historic grievances against each other, and they all basically didn't like each other. And so when it unraveled, there was no easy way to unravel it. And that's why I fear that when America unravels, it's going to be a very difficult and unpleasant experience. But you ask about the plan. From my reading of history, I've never found a case in which a revolution took place because of a plan. Lenin, when he was in exile from 1906 or so to 1917 in Switzerland, didn't sit down and produce a plan, a map, a guidebook on how these communists were going to conquer Russia. They built up their resources, they recruited people, they arranged their financing from people like Alexander Helfand and Jacob Schiff in America. A lot of their leading operatives took shelter in America, which gave shelter to these violent revolutionaries, and then sent them back when the Tsar abdicated. A huge contingent of the Soviet in St. Petersburg, including Leon Trotsky, were living in the delightful city of New York. And they were put on a ship and they were sent back where they could indulge all of the hatred and racial nastiness that they held toward Russians and have a real bacchanalia of blood. But anyway, Lenin just organized and propagandized and waited for the system to break up in Russia. The Tsarist system had a much greater chance of survival than the system that misrules us. They were doing quite well down to 1914. The war eventually caused them to collapse. Our system is not doing well at all, and it's deteriorating quite, so much faster than what happened to the Tsar in World War I. So it would be a mistake to start laying out a plan that would give the FBI political cops a chance to try to claim that we're plotting a revolution. We have to prepare and let the system kill itself.
I wasn't so much talking about a plan for revolution. I was talking about a plan to avoid an October 1917 here. I mean, that will be very, very hard on a lot of people, may be the end for a lot of people if it happens. But you said one thing that's kind of interesting. Are you saying that you believe that one thing that the white people of Georgia should consider is basically vacating Georgia and giving it to Stacey Abrams and her ilk?
Well, I think this is happening naturally. I hope they don't, because I'm living here under some pressure. You ask what it made people like me think to live in this state, but I live under considerable pressure in Atlanta. Friends are urging me to leave the state. People are urging me to move to a safer place, but I'm old and I don't really care anymore. I've taken care of 4 family members and a friend through long, terrible old ages. And I know that the best years of my life are over at age 75. And most of the warranty is gone. And so I don't really give a damn anymore. But yeah, whites are doing this automatically. We had a 50th wedding anniversary for my parents in the 1980s. And my father's family was scattered. He was orphaned young by two tragedies in his family. And he was much younger than the other people in the family. And so they sort of knew where people were, but we tracked them down. And we had over 150 people come to this reunion. It was a very touching event. Many of these people had never seen each other in 50 plus years. But what I noticed was very few of them lived in South Carolina. They had moved up into the western North Carolina, eastern Tennessee. We're sort of unconsciously following the trail of the Indians. We are leaving these areas, and so people will naturally leave them. But I don't think that's going to be the solution, because that's what my esteemed leader Jared Taylor thinks, is that we can move into communities and set them up. I don't agree. They're not going to allow us to do that. They're going to send in the federal troops. They're going to send in the FBI and the Justice Department marshals. They're going to fly in the non-white settlers and colonists from Mexico and Haiti. They're going to look for pretexts to indict people that try to obstruct this. That is not a realistic situation. What we need to do is to talk to people like we're doing tonight. Get them to consider the idea of an ethnostate. You spoke with mild disparagement in your voice of the use of the word ethnostate. That's a great breakthrough. Just having that idea out in the people of the minds of Caucasian Americans is a revolutionary act. It's like an acid eroding the bonds that bind people to this country and its present government. So that's a great step forward. People start thinking about an ethnostate. We also, as I've discussed with some people who don't agree with me, and they're perhaps why they're certainly wise men, I think that we need to use this time to plan on how will the ethnostate be run? How will we set it up where we will never again make the mistakes that doomed America from its very birth? I mean, this country was doomed at birth. This is not something that's happened recently. As the old English proverb says, the child is father to the man. And what happened in 1776 could have no other result than what we have today. That was the inevitable result. When you believe that all men are created equal, and you inscribe that on government buildings, and you make children recite that in their schools, this kind of insanity can only end up with Pol Pot and the killing fields of Cambodia and Jim Jones at Jonestown. That's the only place it can go. And so the end is inevitable. The end has always been inevitable. Nothing in history is forever. And this is about over. And now it's reaching an explosive point. Whites can go on looking out for number one. These lawyers can go on sucking up like the ones I know. But it's coming for them. It's coming. Experience. I love Proverbs. Experience keeps a hard school, but fools will have no other. And these I'm looking out for number one whites. They're going to have the education truth beat into them. They can all hide now about the McMichaels, because the McMichaels are working class people, and they can tell themselves, I've got money. I live in Buckhead. I've got money. I don't have to worry about the McMichaels. But the day is going to come. It's going to be them and their children. This is going to be happening to. It's gathering momentum, and it can't be stopped. Our enemies can't turn it off. They have set something in motion they cannot stop.
So nobody, you brought up the McMichaels again, and so nobody in your world is saying that this is cause for panic.
I have a circle of friends and associates, including lawyers, some of whom people would be surprised to know would ever speak to me, but I have connections with people that trust me and talk to me. There are people that read the tea leaves or smell the coffee. and they know what's coming. But most lawyers do not, and most of them will go along. I was sued some years back in a normal standard contract suit. Did not involve any of the controversial issues like race or anything else. I had to interview 12 lawyers before I found a lawyer who would represent me. They all Googled me, and they said, oh, I can't afford to represent you. I'd get hurt. These are the people that go to law day banquets and puff themselves up as officials of the Bar Association, strut around on the stage talking about how lawyers represent unpopular people. But the reality is they were too chicken, they were too yellow, they were too materialistic to do their jobs. So no, most of them are going to go on going along. But all of this is ending. Reparations are coming. Direct transfers of white wealth, no longer disguised as Section 8 or food stamps or Job Corps or Head Start or any of the other ways that we already transfer our tax money from our nation into the underserved communities of the other nations. So, but now it will be just outright. If you're white, you'll pay $2,000 a year to people who are not white, and then as they get more numbers, it'll become $10,000 a year. The thing to remember, it's never going away. Sandra Day O'Connor, when she cast the deciding vote to preserve anti-white discrimination by law, otherwise called affirmative action, she remarked that, well, this is temporary. In 20 years, everybody will be equal and the races will be equal and everybody will get along. No, Sandra, that's not the way it's going to be. That's not how it turned out. More than 20 years later, the relations are worse. They hate us more. Black home ownership is now lower than it was when the Fair Housing Act was passed. These inherent biological problems of different types of people competing with each other cannot be cured by things like affirmative action. They won't even be cured by reparations. But it's going to get worse. And with enough suffering, whites may develop what they need, which is a sense of community, and they may finally get rid of this accursed individualism that is our greatest weakness.
So you said an interesting thing. You said that what started in 1776 could have no other result than what we're doing. The Jefferson's unfortunate phrase about all men are created equal. Something he surely didn't believe. I mean, he didn't live that way. Nothing in his life suggested he really believed it. But I guess it just sounded really good at the time.
It sounded nice, and he probably had been treated rudely by titled English aristocrats who didn't invite him to their tea party, and he wanted to get even with them.
It's quite a thought. Yeah, things like that do happen, I guess. But okay, how would we reform ideologically? I mean, I guess I keep hoping that somebody's going to say, let's start dividing up the country, or let's start dividing up the wealth so that we can, without war, without bloodshed, we can create a solution here. I mean, that's how the opposite is happening. We've been inviting, I mean, as I recall, I can't remember when the last time I was in Georgia. It's been several years, but just to the east of Atlanta, you have like a little miniature Latin America, don't you?
Oh yes. We are very progressive. We're the next state that's going to do the majority minority flip. As of 2018, the New York Times said that 40% of the population of Georgia was non-white and or immigrant, and they already were registered in numbers beyond their numbers. They were 40% of the population. There were 46% of the registered voters. And that's much worse today. It was much worse in 2020, which is why Biden carried the state. It will be worse in 2022, which is why I hope the Republicans will be defeated in the upcoming election in Georgia. I will certainly never vote for Christopher Carr, the Attorney General, or Bryan Kemp, our governor. I will vote for Stacey Abrams, or I'll vote for Bryan Kemp. And that's what a wise white person will do.
Okay, why? That's pretty interesting. I mean, Stacey Abrams strikes me as kind of repulsive.
She is repulsive. That's the good thing about her. Bryan Kemp has been able to do things that if Stacey Abrams had done them, the whites would have reacted against her. Here are two of the things that Bryan Kemp has been able to do. Bryan Kemp got together. Bryan Kemp is not very bright, and I'm told that he is basically run by the Attorney General, Chris Carr, who is bright, but worse even than Kemp. Chris Carr is the driving force behind the injustice, the lynch mob railroading of the McMichaels. More than anybody else, Republican Attorney General Chris Carr can claim the, quote, credit, end quote, for this monstrous obscenity in our law system. He got Kemp signed up, and they had a press conference with the director of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, our political police, the equivalent of the FBI on the national level. And the two of them told the media that they had seen the video of the McMichaels, and they were just out hunting Black people. They just went and shot down a Black guy because he was jogging down the street. Even I, as bitter as I sound tonight, was so naive, and I still have these feelings that people will tell the truth. I assumed that the video actually showed that. I mean, there are white people that are hateful and horrible and kill Negroes. I'm not one of them, and you're not one of them, and neither of us condone them or want to associate with them. And so I just assumed that the governor of the state and the state's highest law enforcement officer, Attorney General, would not stand in front of a camera and lie about it to taint the jury pool and potentially kill 3 innocent men so that they could have a photo op. But that's exactly what they did, because I then saw the video, as you probably have seen the video. The video does not show what Chris Carr and Bryan Kemp said it shows. It does not show them out hunting Black people. Far from it. Travis McMichael never even lowered his gun and aimed it, or raised his gun and aimed it at Arbery as Arbery attacked him. He kept the gun pointed to the ground and allowed Arbery to run all the way to him and attack him and try to wrest the gun from him. So why would I vote for someone like Chris Carr and Bryan Kemp, two people who have demonstrated that sociopathic personality? I don't want them. I don't want to be ruled by people who will send innocent people to jail for the rest of their lives and orphan Travis McMichael's young son. I will not vote for them just because Stacey Abrams is a Black radical. The second thing that Kemp did, let's look at another thing he did. When the Black Lives Matter people got together with the Antifa in Atlanta and rioted after the George Floyd thing and the whole buildup that we saw nationwide of sustained, unrestrained, permitted, and tolerated criminality, Bryan Kemp ordered the National Guard to make no arrests and not to interfere. And night after night after night, in the neighborhood of Atlanta in which I live, mobs from South Atlanta, ranging from 4,000 to 5,000 people, mostly Black, but with a sprinkling of these horrific Marxist terrorists in the Antifa, came up into this neighborhood and looted and burned on a mass level of criminality. Our mayor, who is not white like Bryan Kemp, Keisha Lance Bottoms, issued orders to the police: no arrest, no interference. And the police and the National Guard stood back and watched the mob of criminals loot and burn away. Now, Bryan Kemp could get away with that because he can hide behind the label GOP, Republican Party. And he hopes, cunning sociopath that he is, that the base of the Republican Party in Georgia will be dumb enough not to see what kind of a person he is. What would have happened if if Stacey Abrams had been governor of Georgia and tried either of these things, going on television for an adoring news media and lying about the video, or ordering the National Guard to stand down and allow her race to commit mass criminality along with a fringe of abnormal whites? What would the reaction of whites and of a lot of Republican legislators have been? They would have been mad as hell and would have been opposing it. But because all this was done behind the mask of Chris Carr and Bryan Kemp with the label Republican on their coats, there was no blowback at all. So I would rather have Stacey Abrams lying about the video, trying to railroad whites into jail, and telling the police and the National Guard to do what they were told to do in Charlottesville, and simply to stand aside and let them have at it. Because white people will grasp that. They won't understand it when they see a George Bush or a Richard Nixon or a Bryan Kemp in office. Those people can sell our enemy's program much better than Angela Davis or Stacey Abrams. And Stacey Abrams is a better woman. As a human being, she's a better person. She's loyal to her race. We have people like Chris Carr and Bryan Kemp who like as if they were sociopaths, are disloyal. They feel no tie of commitment to us. They're happy to see the Confederate flags and monuments come down. Why should they worry about that? Why should they worry about residents of Buckhead who are being terrorized by Black Mountain? They don't live there. They're on TV. They're important. So Stacey Abrams is simply a better person as a human being than either Bryan Kemp or Chris Carr.
Sam Dickson, you are blowing my mind. You are blowing my mind. This is amazing analysis you're giving.
Do you think I'm crazy? A lot of people think I'm crazy. I may be crazy.
I think you're quite brilliant, and I
know I'm not that. But
I had never thought of it that way at all. And
we were better off. We were better off when we had a blackface and Obama carrying on and calling for more immigrants and doing all the things that he did, ordering the prosecutors in Pennsylvania to drop the charges against the Black Panthers who threatened white voters with clubs on election day, things like that. We would be better off to have Kamala Harris or Angela Davis doing those things, and we certainly would be better off having Barack Obama than to have what we've got now, Joe Biden up doing that. Because he's white, white people let their defenses down. Better Angela Davis than Joseph Biden. I know I am sane enough to know that these things sound bizarre to people.
Hey,
someone's got to say them. Somebody has got to make white Americans pull the plug and stop believing that this is a nation with liberty and justice for all, and to see it for the monstrosity that it has become. And I say that I wore my country's uniform. I was a soldier. I was in the infantry. Unfortunately, I didn't have to go to Vietnam. I'm descended from a general in the Revolution. I can claim to be part of the founding stock of this country. But I recognize now that we have to get out of this thing.
But where do we go and how? I mean, that is the interesting question. I mean, if we don't have some sort of plan, I mean, you know, face it, the Mormons kind of had a plan. They were being kicked around and discriminated against in the early 19th century, and they found a patch of desert where nobody would bother them, and that worked out kind of okay for them. It really did. And there are no patches of desert left, really, in North America, or even I guess we could go to the middle of the Sahara or something, and that would be a whole different kind of bizarre plan. But I mean, you're suggesting forcing a crisis for which there will be basically no knowable resolution, right? I mean, that's what you're sort of advocating.
No, I'm not forcing anything. for the benefit of the grand jury or whoever may hear this tape, if the FBI decides to contrive some kind of claim that I violated the Patriot Act in some way, I'm not advocating any kind of action against the system at all. I believe in jujitsu. You let them make the attack. And I trust our enemies more than I do our own people. Our enemies have, like my father, who was a very devout Presbyterian, we're descended from Presbyterian martyrs. Like he used to say, that the one person who never failed the Reformation was the Pope. The Pope did about everything possible to try to wreck the Roman Catholic Church. And our enemies today, and I say this, including Roman Catholics and atheists and pagans and everybody else that's like you and me, that's part of this great European white nation. Our enemies are not failing us. They're doing exactly what I want them to do. They are destroying themselves. They're destroying this country. They may be dumb enough even to get us into another war. I've never been one of these right wingers predicting imminent collapse until lately. I'm not a right winger, by the way. I'm a liberal on more issues than I'm a conservative. But I now believe that it could come. How can America afford another war? We have lunatics that talk about we're going to go to war with China over Taiwan. National Public Radio is just itching for us to go to war with Russia over Ukraine. We couldn't even beat the Taliban in Afghanistan. Our armed forces are such a joke. And we are riddled with debt. We incurred $6 trillion of debt, and it's still counting, for the adventures to free the oppressed women of the Muslim world in Iraq and Afghanistan. They're doing everything I want. They're just pushing this. They're bringing in the immigrants. Good. Only I regret is that they're not going to the areas I want them to. I want them sent to Manhattan. I want them sent to Boston. I want them sent to Nancy Pelosi's district in San Francisco. I think Nancy and her vote, the fools that vote for her, I'd like to have them, since they want somebody that wants all this pro-immigrant stuff, I think they should be given a gift of 50,000 Haitians, don't you? I think they should enjoy it. And by God, if I had my way, they would get it. These people would be at Martha's Vineyard. They'd be at Hyannisport. They'd be in Boston. They'd be in Nancy Pelosi. They'd go to Liz Cheney's district. They'd give her share too. Exactly what people have got to stop being wimps and goofballs and credulous true believers in this wretched system that rules us. And our enemies are driving it. We will never overthrow them. Lenin never overthrew the Tsar. Robespierre didn't overthrow Louis XVI in the French Revolution. The system overthrew itself in all those countries. And our system is way ahead of them. They're moving much faster than Louis XVI and Tsar Nicholas could ever dream of moving. They're doing everything they can to wreck this country.
Quite a perspective you've got there. You listed all these people, and I noticed that as a native South Carolinian, you didn't mention what you'd like to do to Lindsey Graham. Well, I mean, he's part of the system. He and Marco Rubio, who are some others in that party? What's his name in Texas? Cruz. They are all part and parcel of the problem. They're tied in with the FBI, the military-industrial complex. You know who Glenn Greenwald is? Yes, of course. Well, I heard him give a talk. He's the Jewish homosexual who helped the great American hero, Edward Snowden, escape American injustice and seek refuge in Russia, which shielded them from Joe Biden, who was personally conducting the pursuit against Edward Snowden for the crime of having revealed to the American people the largest violation of their liberties in the history of the Republic. And Joe Biden was pursuing him, and Putin gave him refuge, which probably plays a little role in why Biden and people like him hate Putin so much because he did that. But Greenwald explained why Trump backed off and did not pardon Snowden and Julius Assange.
And he says the reason is that Cruz and Graham and Rubio and a bunch of people like them went to him in the U.S. Senate and said, if you pardon that guy who spoiled the wonderful work of our FBI and the national security state in copying every single email that every American citizen received or sent, if you reward these awful people who stopped that wonderful program, we will impeach you. We will vote with the Democrats to impeach you. So here again, who do I hate the most? It's not Chuck Schumer. No. And it isn't really even Marco Rubio, since he's a Cuban. He's part of the Cuban nation. Or Ted Cruz, or not Ted Cruz. What is his name? Ted Cruz, I guess that is it. Anyway, I was confusing him with the actor for a moment. Anyway, he, these are people, Lindsey Graham is disloyal to his people. Chuck Schumer is loyal. I expect him to be out to get Snowden, so Lindsey Graham is worse than Chuck Schumer. Here again, if I had to vote between Schumer and Graham, there's no doubt who I'd vote for. I'd vote for Schumer.
It's interesting that you mentioned Glenn Greenwald, because I've actually admired Glenn Greenwald, his writing for a long time, because he really has spoken out against the police state. I mean, does he still live in Brazil? He lived in Brazil for a while.
I think he is. He's on Tucker Carlson's program frequently. I admire him too. He has done good work, and he's not cut from the same bolt of cloth as Rubio and Cheney and Bryan Kemp and Chris Carr and people like that. He may be Jewish, he may be gay, but he's a better man than they are.
Did you read his book, How Would a Patriot Act?
No, I have not.
It is a wonderful commentary on the law that basically buried the Bill of Rights.
I'm sorry, my cat is bothering us. I may have to put him out of the room.
I don't mind furry visitors. It's getting late, and I don't know how late you want to go tonight. You look like you're getting a little bit tired. But before we quit, what is your cat's name?
Smokey.
Okay. Looks kind of gray and smoky. Okay. But I wanted to just talk about a few specifics in the McMichael case. One of the things that was entered today, 2/22/22, was an order that I thought was kind of interesting. Just before trial, I'm going to read it. It's very short. Just before trial, this court entered an order prohibiting public disclosure of the names and images of jurors and prospective jurors. That decision was premised on a finding that widespread and intense media attention to the case might expose jurors to intimidation or harassment. In doing so, the court considered all of the circumstances surrounding the case, including media coverage, the nature of the case, and the specific evidence and issues in this case. There were no objections. Since then, the court has taken precautions to minimize any prejudicial effects and to protect the parties' fundamental rights to an impartial jury in a fair trial. These include utilizing a thorough questionnaire to gather information about prospective jurors prior to voir dire, conducting a thorough and sifting voir dire over 5 days made up of panel questions, individual questions, court-led questions, and counsel-led questions, both in open court and at sidebar, disclosing the name of prospective jurors to counsel and the parties, giving cautionary instructions to the jury, informing them that their names were withheld to protect their privacy from any unwanted media attention. The court enters this written order to formally memorialize these procedures and cautionary measures on the record. That strikes me as a little bit odd. But can you sort of give your Georgia lawyer's perspective on this?
Well, what they're talking about is the sad fact that any juror on that panel who has a room temperature IQ is going to be aware of what would happen if he or she returned an innocent verdict. They're all under enormous pressure. Heroes are rare. Most people are cowardly and are not heroes. And these jurors are going to be fearful, as they were in the first McMichael's case, that if they were to vote for an acquittal, they could be subject to being, they could put themselves in real danger. And that certainly is the case. And let's go back to the Chauvin trial and to show your listeners just how bad this country is, just how rotten and beyond redemption it is. You will recall that the weekend before the jury commences deliberations in the Chauvin trial in Minneapolis, Congressperson Maxine Waters flew herself to Minneapolis, called a mob of African Americans together at the courthouse, where she made it clear, if we don't get the conviction we want, there's going to be trouble nationwide. There's going to be hell to pay. The same thing, not before we leave this statesperson, this stateswoman who makes our laws and rules us in this great country of ours. There was a proposal in Congress to condemn her actions in trying to intimidate a jury with mob by mob. 219 Democrats voted on that resolution, and 219 found nothing to criticize in a congressperson calling a mob together to threaten a jury. That's the kind of country you live in. These are the people who rule you, people that are on that moral level. And don't think it's much better with the Republicans either. But going down to the McMichael's case, in the first trial down in the Georgia court, Blacks gathered at the courthouse. They walked around outside the courthouse on the grounds with AK-47s. They put up placards and signs demanding a conviction. They were out there day after day after day. They jammed the courtroom, obviously intimidating the jury. One lawyer had the gall to tell the judge that this was wrong, and the judge ruled him out of order and refused to do anything to stop this. The Atlanta papers attacked that lawyer for violating the freedom of speech of African Americans, trying to violate it. Now, you go back in history to the trial of Leo Frank, the Jewish corporate executive who was accused of murdering and raping a teenage white Christian girl around 1913. One of the articles of faith that is produced to question the legitimacy of his conviction by the Anti-Defamation League and people like Harry Golden in his book, A Little Girl is Dead, is the allegation that an anti-Semitic mob surrounded the courthouse chanting, "Kill the Jew or we'll kill you." And this basically is what Maxine Waters did. It's basically what the judge had no problem with at the thing we still call a court, instead of a revolutionary tribunal like it was called in France under Robespierre, where the McMichaels were tried. They didn't have any problem. There's no doubt about it that a mob appeared threatening violence and intimidating the jury. Nobody cares. White people aren't rioting about it like Black people would do. There are no marches and no protests. No one cares. So at least this much, the Anti-Defamation League hailed McMichael's convictions. Well, all right. That surrenders any power to their claim about the anti-Semitic mob. We know now they believe in mob intimidation. So long as it isn't a member of their community, of their nation, so long as it is directed to our nation, they don't have a problem with it. So this is the country you live in. The McMichaels were denied bail. There's no reason why they should have been denied bail. They were kept in jail for 20 months when they couldn't earn money to pay their lawyers. It made it difficult to work with their lawyers. It injured their health because the judge said they didn't have right to bail under the U.S. Constitution. Now, the two criteria for bail, for denying bail, is supposed to be risk of flight, which was non-existent, and risk of repetition of the crime. Since the McMichaels had never committed a crime and accused of a crime in their lives, under both criteria, they should have gotten bail. But our system still works. Our glorious constitutional system still works, Augustus, because in the case of the Black guy who drove his car into the Christmas parade up in Waukesha, whatever it is, Minnesota. Is that Minnesota? I'm not even sure where the city is.
Wisconsin, actually.
Yeah. Well, wherever it is, he drove his car, as we all know. A guy whose social media is full of the foaming at the mouth hatred that he bears toward white people. The courts have given him bail. It's okay for him to get out of jail in a case in which he deliberately drove his car into a crowd of women, and mostly women and children, and killed 6 of them and injured 30. But in this ridiculous McMichael's prosecution, they weren't entitled to any bail. How can any white listener of this program go on believing that he can go to court and get justice in a country like that? How can anybody, in the face of Maxine Waters, the actions of the Democratic congressman in Congress, the mob, if you still believe that you're going to get a fair shake in the United States of America, you deserve what's coming to you and your children. You deserve it. People that's that much like a dodo bird, they deserve what they're going to get.
You think there's basically no hope at all?
No. There's always hope. There's always hope. Little Estonia got its independence. Little Latvia got its independence after the fall of communism. They didn't overthrow communism. Communism collapsed from its own insanity and stupidity, the way the United States is collapsing as it rushes about the world, getting involved in making itself a partner to every Muslim marriage on the globe and fighting wars in Iraq and Afghanistan to liberate women, and doing all these goofy things. You know, the Estonia and Latvia did not overthrow that system. It overthrew itself, and our system is overthrowing itself. We will not overthrow it. We should not make any plans to overthrow it. We just simply wait and plan and prepare and wait for it to destroy itself and to collapse of its own rot, which it's doing. So, but the idea of voting your way out, how are we going to vote our way out? What are demographics? I mean, do people grasp what our own propaganda say? Whites are virtually, they're barely half the country now. How are you going to vote your way out? You can't do it now. You certainly aren't going to do it. You could have done it 40 years ago. The last chance to vote themselves out was at least 1964 and probably 1952 or 1932. There is no possibility of reform in the system. There is hope. As I use the example of Latvia and Lithuania, when the Soviet Union fell, only 52% of the population of Latvia were Latvians. The rest were people who had been colonized on them by the Soviet system to break them. But Latvians were real people. They weren't looking out for number one, to use the title of that wretched libertarian Robert Ringel and his book. They were people who were real people. They actually had a language. They actually had a literature and a religion and folk music and a nation. They had all the things that white Americans have given up in the pursuit of material comfort. And those people decided, we may only be 52% and 48% may be opposed to Latvia being an independent nation, but we are going to be independent again. And they did it. And the same thing can happen. All that's lacking is the will and the willingness to suffer and the sense of community and loyalty that we have lost. That's all that's lacking. White people could stop it all tomorrow, not by voting, but by simply withdrawing from the system. If we withdraw our faith in the system, what can they do? If white people just said, we give up, we look at things like the McMichael prosecution, we look at things like this black criminal getting bail and the McMichaels couldn't, we look at Maxine Waters, we look at the failure of even one single Democrat in Congress to object to appeals to mob violence to intimidate a jury. We've had it with you. We don't believe in you. Garland is not our attorney general. He is your attorney general. Biden is not our president. He's your president. Blinken is not our secretary of state. He's your secretary of state. And you're on your own. We may have to live under you, but we don't like you. And we obey you only by force. And just that alone would paralyze the system. The system lives from people who will not wake up and smell the coffee and want to go on believing in reform. We have to be Bolsheviks. We cannot be Mensheviks.
Governments to derive their power from the consent of the governed is what I think you're saying.
That's not true. That's never been true in history.
No, you're saying exactly that. Governments derive their power from the consent of the government. And
No. I haven't given my consent. Have you given your consent? Have the American people, did the American people ever give their consent to a program to colonize them, their country with third world aliens? The polls have always shown an overwhelming majority of people don't want these policies. We live in an unrepresentative government, or an unrepresentative democracy that hates America, real Americans. It hates Anglo-Saxons. It hates Germans. It even hates the Irish. It hates Polish. It hates Lithuanian Americans. It hates us. And it doesn't have our, it has never acted according to what we wanted. It's acting what they want. So no, this government here does not derive its existence, maybe from the consent of the government, except in the most passive way that whites are so unimaginative and so cowardly that they go on putting up with this stuff.
Passive acceptance is a form of consent.
Well, there's a rule in law that silence implies consent. And Stalin certainly could say that all those people in the little rows out in Red Square cheering him and listening to his speeches, they were silent too. I guess they consented to Comrade Stalin.
It's like defaulting. It is exactly like defaulting in a lawsuit. If you don't answer, you lose.
Mm-hmm. I've been able to change my mind, and I urge other people to always be willing to change your mind, to always be willing to listen to the other side. When I was in college, I was against the Vietnam War because I was an isolationist, as my father and ancestors, many of them were. But I put on my ROTC uniform, and I had my short hair, and I went and I marched around with the other cadets. And when I got out of law school, I went in the Army and all that stuff. And there was a side of me that didn't like the guys that fled to Canada. I now apologize to them. They did the right thing. They did the right thing in defying the draft and leaving America and going to Canada. We need to understand that. Snowden did the right thing in breaking the law by revealing to the American people what was being done to them. And so, yeah, we need to get a lot more elastic. We need to open our mind to the totality of possibilities. Stop being restricted. Stop reading off a menu that only has two entrees, Republican or Democratic. I compare this to going into a restaurant where the menu says you can have a lunch of horse turds or cow turds. I'm not interested in either one. I want another restaurant. I'm ready to leave that restaurant and go somewhere else. And we have to leave this restaurant and go somewhere else. It's as simple as that, Augustus.
Well, it's very interesting, but where is the other restaurant?
They're going to give it to us. They're going to wreck this country, and they're going to drive it they're going to drive the truck into the ditch. There's nothing else they can do. They will never win. We may lose, but they will never win. This country is the supreme enforcer worldwide. We are the ones that are trying to overthrow Oban in Hungary. Because he won't sign up for the program of colonizing Hungary with Muslims. We're trying the same thing against Putin for largely similar reasons. We are the people who overthrew the monarchies at the end in World War I and instituted these corrupt governments that followed the much superior monarchies in Europe. We are the people that fund the ethnic cleansing in Palestine. We are the driving force. Without us, the people who misrule us will not be able to enforce their will on the world. And fortunately, they are so eaten up with hatred of us that they cannot control themselves. They have to go on destroying America because they cannot control the constant hatred that they bear in their minds toward us. And so they will wreck this country. Just to imagine if they get us in war with the Chinese. Blinken went and tried to lay the law down to the Chinese at that meetup in Alaska, and they just laughed at him and at America. He started telling them, now here's what we want you to do in your northwest province of Xinjiang. This is what we expect you to do. You're to do A, B, C, D, and this is the great America, and we're telling you how to run your, and they just laughed at him. They said, you don't run the world anymore. You don't have this kind of power. What do we want to do? Screw you. And they get it. Blinken doesn't get it. Biden doesn't get it. They don't get it that when they colonize this country with 200, 300 million Chinese, no one's going to care about the things that Blinken and Garland and Elena Kagan and all these other people that rule us, all these things that they care about, these buttons they can push with people, they're not going to care about that. And the U.S. may very well collapse. We will no longer be able to intervene around the world and impose sanctions on countries like Hungary and Poland and Russia and enforce our will, force Romania to get rid of the First Amendment in their constitution, which is a requirement for them to join NATO. Can't join NATO if you have freedom of speech. What are you thinking about? You've got to have a law criminalizing criticism of Jews. You can't allow people to have freedom of speech on that issue. If you allow freedom of speech on that issue, you're not fit to join NATO. They're not going to have the power to go around the world doing that anymore if they get rid of us. And if we get away from them, especially if we run out of the new country the way it ought to be run, they're not going to get anything out of us either. We're not going to be sending foreign aid to these countries that they want us to support. We're not going to be intervening in these wars. Far from it. So either way, we will prevail. Now, or either way, they will not prevail. It's coming to an end. They're sawing off the limb they're sitting on. And I won't be here. I'll be gone. As a Presbyterian, I'll be up in my predestined place in heaven as part of the predestined elect, and I'll be strumming my harp. But a lot of people listening here, I think they will live to see the day when all of this comes asunder.
Have you been practicing your harp?
I can't play it yet, but I'm sure I can play it up there. And as St. Tertullian said, the bliss of the righteous will be heightened by looking down on the torments of the damned.
Oh, Sam Dickson, I tell you, this has been an educational experience because I've never heard anybody put it quite the way you're putting it. And
well, I'm sorry. I know I seem crazy, and I probably shouldn't say these things. I get reproached by a lot of people, but that's it. I'm not really a bad person. I'm not as bad as I sound. The largest charitable contribution I've ever given, as a matter of public record, was a gift to the Big Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church. That didn't cut me any slack when Morris Dees and the Southern Poverty Law Center decided to cook up that smear on me that's on the internet. It wouldn't cut me any slack at all if Garland finds some way to indict me and railroad me into jail like they have the McMichaels or the Proud Boys. But I don't hate Black people. Some years ago, one of the newspapers in Atlanta, we were doing a story on me, and they worked on it for months. I was getting calls from lawyers telling me that this reporter was going to them, trying to find some factoid they could cite to show that I had been rude or unkind or unprofessional to any Black or Jew, and they couldn't find anybody. And the reporter later admitted to me, when he finally interviewed me after all this stuff, that they couldn't get anybody to say anything ugly about me. The lawyers who dealt with me said, no, I'm a Jew. He never did anything to me. I'm Black. He was nice to me. And so on. It didn't stop them from running the article. They ran the article with a picture of me on it saying, I'm not a Nazi, says Sam Dickson. And of course, everybody reading it would then immediately assume, I bet he is. But no, I just see it the way I see it, Carolus. I just don't see any way to see it any other way. I'm realistic. I'm realistic about my age. At 75, the hourglass is about empty. I know all kinds of former classmates of mine. They seem to think they've got another 40 or 50 years, but I see it for what it is. And I look at this country, there is no way that this country can go on and continue to function. It is coming to an end. It is grinding down. Financially, it's grinding down. We're the biggest, several decades, 3 or 4 decades ago, we were the biggest creditor nation on the earth. Now we're the biggest debtor nation on the earth. China holds our debt obligations. The old proverb says the debtor does not give orders to the creditor. But Blinken thought he could go to Alaska and give orders representing the debtor nation to our creditors, and that didn't work. And all it will take is some foolishness by Biden, all these other hate-crazed, drunk people that run him, to actually go to war with China over Taiwan, to send our Navy across the Pacific to fight a Navy that is now bigger than our Navy, that will have air support from their air bases 50 miles away in the event of a naval conflict. How can America be that dumb? How can they still be deluded by the idea of an almighty America? How can Blinken and Biden think that? How could Bush imagine that we could spend $6 trillion on these goofy wars in Iraq and Afghanistan? How can anyone be that dumb? You and I and people like us have been right all my life. I gave a talk on this. Had the world been run by people like us for the last 70, had we run America for the last 75 years? Every time, people, these so-called right-wing extremists, racial nationalists, whatever they want to call us, over and over again, we've called it right. And everything we've said has come true. Nothing they have said has come true. They have been wrong on everything.
Got a comment from the audience. I pretty much agree with everything this guy says, but myself, I'm not willing to wait around for the system to wreck itself, which it will, as he is for the day to come. What do you say to him?
Well, there are ways to handle this. One is simply by talking to people, mailing persuasive pamphlets and books to the leadership element in the town in which you live. There is passive resistance. That also will be harder for the system to handle than the occasional goofball that goes out and commits a crime or something. We had an example of effective passive resistance in New York City when odious Mayor Blasio had been attacking the cops and doing all this stuff, and then a cop got killed. Now, there's nothing these wretched sociopathic politicians like more than pictures of themselves around a bunch of guys in police uniforms. That really sells people. There are a lot of people that love uniforms, and that really gets the voters voting for people like de Blasio. So this little creep showed up at the funeral for the cop, and hundreds of cops were there for this commemoration of the cop's death. And the little creep who had been spent his time out pandering to Antifa, pandering to Black Lives Matter, attacking cops, repeating lies about the cops, like the idea that there's an epidemic of white cops killing Black people. So he got up on the stage. This is going to be his opportunity to get some real good photos for the campaign. One of the cops turned his chair around, turned his back on him. And then over the entire room, all of the cops turned their chairs around, and the SOB was speaking to a bunch of backs. You remember that? Yeah. That happened. That happened. And he did not get what he wanted. And the system media that sucks up to him and peddles him as part of their own filth to the voters, they didn't get what they wanted. So it had to be airbrushed out and got very little of them. But that's the kind of passive resistance that can work. Flash mobs can work. Before the end of Europa was a very encouraging group. It had the right spirit. Its spirit was post-America. It wasn't a reform group. The whole spirit of it accepted the fact we've got to have something new. We've got to get out of this system and into something better. And the people running that arranged these little flash mobs, not really mobs. They did want the Parthenon replica in Nashville. They told people to be ready, have their signs ready. They would get a text and an email giving them about 15, 20 minutes notice. And they did that. And about 200 of these guys, mostly guys, showed up to demonstrate against the misruling class and against immigration in front of the Parthenon, a symbol of our civilization. And they got videos and pictures, and they put them out on the internet. It went viral on the internet. It got some attention in the local media, although the national media very carefully censored it. But the Antifa, I was there. The Antifa came. They came rushing. And there were 10 or 12 of these wretched people yelling and screaming, but they couldn't get the mass. They couldn't do what they did at Charlottesville. There are little things you can do like that. And you can develop yourself. I would tell whoever sent this in, develop yourself, save, invest, take courses in whatever line of work you're in, read, make yourself the best in whatever line of work you're in. Get money. Money is not a betrayal. Money is a resource. And work for the day when these people will collapse themselves the way Louis XVI did, and we'll have a chance to create a healthy nation for our people. If you go out and do anything violent or even talk about it, the worst thing possible is to talk about violence that you don't intend to do. That just guarantees that they're going to be able to railroad you into jail in front of a goofy bunch of jurors who believe that handsome young FBI agent when he gets up and lies and perjures himself, as they generally do. You can't do that. And yes, some of us will die. But, I go back to the Reformation, and I hate to bring it up because it was a terrible division among our people. It should have been worked out. If there'd been a sensible pope, he would have just sent a letter to John Calvin and Martin Luther and said, hey, boys, I'm not going to hurt you. Come down here to Rome with your theologians, and let's have a big meeting with the College of Cardinals. Let's see what we can work out. That would have been the best solution. But, of course, that didn't come. But what happened to cause it with things like this corrupt pope, lured Jan Hus, the reformer in the Czech, but now the Czech Republic. Oh, we're inviting you to this meeting. We give you a safe conduct. Well, Jan Hus went there, and the Pope broke his word. The church wasn't bound by moral laws, and they burned him at the stake. So Hus died. But that sent a message to people all over Europe that, hey, we got to get out of this church. That this church cannot be reformed, and we got to get out of it. So a lot of us will suffer. Things like this don't happen without suffering. You've got to have martyrs. And if it happens, I don't want to be martyred. I want a quick death. And I don't really want to die right now. But, somebody has to do it. And the McMichaels are our martyrs. They show us these were guys who tried to protect their neighborhood, a neighborhood that had a lot of crime. They had seen pictures of this criminal, this dead person. The surveillance apparatuses had gotten pictures of him entering that house. Cops had gone around that neighborhood showing residents the pictures, saying, we think this guy may be committing a lot of these crimes. Do you know who he is? And they said, no. McMichael saw him. He matched the picture. They pursued, they asked him to stop and wait for the police, and he didn't. He ran, and they pursued him, asked him again to stop while they called the police. People who are out just looking to shoot a black guy, as Attorney General Carr and Governor Kemp claimed they were, don't call the cops. Everybody listen to this. Every decent person, every decent black person who's willing to think knows that doesn't fit the story. And eventually, Arbery, who had a history of psychological problems, attacked Travis McMichael. And they were doing what they were protecting their community. Now their lives are ruined. They will die in jail. His son will grow up an orphan. So, this has to happen. These injustices have to happen for white Americans to catch on, at least to the fact that the system's not for them. The critical thing is, will they be able to build community loyalty? Yeah, I feel an intense loyalty to our community. I felt it as a child. My parents instilled it into me. We were Anglo-Saxons. We were English Americans and Scottish Americans. We belonged to our nation's church. We went to the Church of Scotland, the established church in our area of the British Isles. I cared about things. When I looked at the picture of the Parthenon in elementary school, I felt that's part of my community. My community built that Parthenon. I think most white people now don't feel any sense of community at all. They're all happy Kmart shoppers. Will it be possible to create a community out of these people? Psychiatrists say that if a baby doesn't get two eyes and a mouth smiling at it from two parents, or at least one parent, he will never be normal when he grows up. Can you instill in these unnatural white Americans a love of their own people and country, their genuine nation? I hope we can.
Well, that goes back to what you said a little while ago when you said that the statements and the foundation of this country had but one end. What should the statements be going forward? What is the revised standard version?
Well, I argue with other people who are far above, who far outrank me in this movement, and they tell me that it would be a mistake for us to start making concrete plans. I don't agree. Lenin made his plans, and I think we need our plans. We need to think, what will we do? What will be the basis of citizenship? Who will qualify as a citizen? Now, I've had discussions with a lot of prominent people on our side, including people that are unknown, people that hold prominent positions in this country. And they've said to me amazing things. I had one of them say, oh, we could handle 20% non-white. No, that just moves it back the way it was in 1960. They'll start multiplying. We cannot tolerate, we have to know, no, if we're going to have a white country, it has to be the way Denmark was in 1900. Only Danes. They've said things to me like, well, anybody white will be let in. If Hillary Clinton or Heidi Bayrish from the Southern Poverty Law Center, if they show up at the gate and say, oh, now that the non-whites are killing everybody in the nation of Minoria, we want to be in the white part. I'm Hillary Clinton. I'm white too. I'm Heidi Bayrish. I decide I'm white. They would let them come in. There will be no place for such people in my ideal ethnostate. Traitors on that level will not be allowed. I've worked up a solution. I hope if I live long enough and can get out of this wretched law practice to write some books. And one of them is going to be about the ethnostate and the laws that have to be. We would have to have a basis for citizenship. I have that basis, I think. My basis will be, as I said at the American Renaissance Conference, which upset a lot of people, anybody can be a citizen if all of his or her ancestors were Nicene Creed Christians as of 1492. Now, you have to have been reared in a hyper-religious family like I was to even know what the Nicene Creed was or is. But basically, all of the major churches, the state churches in Europe, the Roman Catholics, the Orthodox, the Lutherans, the Anglicans, and the Presbyterians, the state religions, all of them have the Nicene Creed. And so you go back to 1492, the people who had whom I require that we be descended, the Latin ones in Spain and Italy and Greece, Greece isn't Latin, but the Mediterranean ones, they had the Nicene Creed. You go out to Ireland and Scotland, the Celtic areas of Scotland, the Celts had the Nicene Creed. The Anglo-Saxons had the Nicene Creed. The Germans had it. The Teutons had it. The Norse had it. The Slavs had it. And I'm not saying that the people today have to be believing Christians. We're going to have a genuine ethnostate. All kinds of people are going to be in it. You're going to have Roman Catholics, Presbyterians, atheists, pagans, all that kind of stuff. You're going to have drunks. You're going to have alcoholics. You're going to have gay people. It's going to be a real community. But everybody has to be descended from these people because mere race is not enough. Mere DNA is not enough. There has to be a shared identity. We're fortunate. The Slavs, the Latins, the Teutons, the Celts, all the other Germanic peoples, they share a shared identity. If they were healthy, as many of them are in Europe, and not many of them are in America, if they look at the picture of the Parthenon, which I mentioned, they understand that's part of them, even if they live in Kiev or Moscow or Dublin. It's our culture and civilization of ancient paganism filtered through through Christendom, and we can get along with each other. I could move if I were exiled. I could live with olive-skinned Italians in Sicily in reasonable safety. I could not go and live with blonde, blue-eyed Afghans, and there are such people, Muslims, in Afghanistan. I couldn't do that. So I have a definition of citizenship that I think, and you could test by DNA. We can do quick DNA tests and prevent the infiltrators from getting into the society. And then you have to figure out, what are we going to do? We don't want a dictatorship. We don't want, neither do we want a universal suffrage democracy. We have to create something like what existed in England in the 1700s, which my father said was the best system ever devised. They had a monarch with a little power who was the figurehead, the head of state. They had a House of Lords made up of people from distinguished families that rendered service to the nation. And they had a House of Commons that represented public opinion, chosen by a sufficiently broad electorate to keep the capitalists and the people like Zuckerberg and the people that populate Goldman Sachs, to keep these vultures from plundering the country, but narrow enough to prevent the demagogues like Liz Warren and Bernie Sanders and OAC from plundering people who have something. We have to figure out how we're going to set that government up. And we have to have some means of figuring that out. What about the courts? Will there be a committee of reconciliation and forgiveness, like the phony thing they set up in South Africa, for white traitors? I don't think there should be. I think white traitors should be punished. I don't think they belong in our society, and they should be punished. And I have a theory on that. We'll have a parallel court system, and there'll be a special court system to deal with people like Hillary Clinton and Heidi Beirsch, and there'll be a specialized jury. Juries in such cases will consist of people whose sons died of AIDS when they were raped in the prisons, while Joe Biden and the New York Times and the Methodist Church didn't say anything about it. It's going to consist of people whose daughters were murdered. It's going to consist of people like the McMichaels. I think the McMichaels should sit on the jury to try the people like Chris Carr and Bryan Kemp. And we'll have special juries and special courts that will have special ability to deal with these people and to settle accounts with them. And there are a lot of these issues that need to be thought through. And I want to write all that up.
You're saying a lot of really interesting things. And I mean, it's funny because I hadn't thought about testing people's DNA about whether their ancestors were Nicene Christians and
you know how kind of wild and crazy I am, but I say a lot of these things just to provoke thought. But go on.
I'll just tell you what my thought had been, that one of the big mistakes in the original Constitution was the prohibition on religious tests, and it occurred to me that one really interesting religious test that I would kind of like to impose would have been to make as a requirement to be a voter that you recite the Nicene Creed. It's really almost more important that you be willing to recite it than that you swear you believe it, because if you can memorize certain things, you're part of the culture and capable of discussing it. I mean, what if you can memorize it and then intelligently discuss the ways in which you disagree with it? That could be where
the attitude is critically important. We are ruled by an ethnic group, a nation, that survival throughout all the last 25 centuries has been predicated upon an adversarial spirit toward the societies in which they live. We have to have a people with a benevolent, belonging sense of the society in which they live. Like you say, they don't have to believe it all, but they have to not be, they have to be people who may be Christians, but they don't hate Socrates and Plato and Zeus and Jupiter. They can be atheists, but they need to be people who don't hate the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. There was a woman, the most famous woman journalist in Italy was a woman named Arianna Falarchi. Have you ever heard of her?
Arianna, yes, Italian.
Yeah. Well, she's very famous. She did a famous interview of the Ayatollah in which she ripped off the hijab and showed her face, and the Ayatollah at the end of the interview went running screaming from the room because this woman had shown her face. But anyway, she took up the cause of saving Italy from being colonized by Muslims and non-whites late in her life. She died several years ago. And this created consternation in Italy because she was beyond Barbara Walters in their society, and they don't like it when prominent people go against the system. So she was much abused in the press. There were even threats of prosecuting Ms. Falarchi. But she went on a program to debate people who were for open borders. And she made the statement that Italy is a Christian country, and we do not want Muslims in a Christian country. And one of the other participants turned on her and said, Ariana Falarchi, it's no secret. You made it no secret your entire life that you're an atheist. Who are you to talk about being a Christian country when you're not a Christian, you're an atheist? And she gave a perfectly sensible reply. She said, I am an atheist, but I am a Christian atheist. And as crazy as it sounds, that made perfect sense. It meant that she had left the Roman Catholic Church in which she had been reared, but she didn't get bent out of shape when she went to a funeral mass or a wedding mass with some friends of her. She could walk through St. Peter's and not have her blood pressure go up. Our enemies can't do that. When they walk through to St. Peter's or the High Church of St. Giles in Edinburgh, where the Presbyterian Church got its start, they hate what they see. They get angry. Their blood pressure. They can't belong because they hate it. So we have to have people that are at ease with our culture as well as their race.
This is a little bit off the topics we've been discussing, but since you bring up religion, how do you feel about Odinists and basically pagans in the white nationalist movement? How do they fit in? Because some of them have worked themselves up into a frenzy against Christianity.
There's a lot not to like in modern Christianity, that's for sure.
Well, in modern Christianity is a totally different subject. I have a terrible confession to make, and I am going to be 62 in April, and this year, this year, I have not been to church even once because the church that I go to, I feel, has totally betrayed everything that I love about it, and it's simply mind-boggling. I normally go to the oldest Protestant church in Louisiana, which is, by the way, the oldest Protestant church in the entire Mississippi Valley, and the oldest Protestant church anywhere in the Louisiana Purchase. It's both the oldest congregation and the oldest standing church. The church goes back to the 1840s. Congregation goes back to 1805. And basically the main reredos, the stained glass window behind the altar, is dedicated to His Grace General Leonidas Polk.
Then you're an Anglican.
Yes, and almost all the side windows are likewise named with great Southern families and great Southern supporters of the Confederate States of America. And the clergy is a bunch of communists, a bunch of gay communists in some, not the rector is straight, but they've gone out of their way to bring in gays and this month is Black History Month. I'm sure you know and celebrate it. And they have put more emphasis on Black. I haven't been going, but I keep up with the website and the newsletter, and they have put more emphasis on Black Lives Matter and Black History Month than they did on Christmas. And I got particularly annoyed the day after Christmas, St. Stephen's Day, that the 26th was a Sunday. And so the day after Christmas, one of the gay members of the clergy gave the homily, and he did not mention St. Stephen's. He did not mention that it was the second day of Christmas, and he did not mention anything about martyrdom or the relationship between Christianity, but the birth of Christ, anything else. And that was the last time I went to church. I
don't go. Yeah, I've had people call me a devout Christian. Boy, if I'm a devout Christian, Christianity is in deep trouble. When people ask me what I am, I tell them I'm a member of the Church of Laodicea, which, if you remember the epistles of the Apostle Paul, the Church of Laodicea would be spewed out because it was lukewarm. So I am certainly no example. And if I had such thing as a patron saint, which we Presbyterians know, of course, is the rankest form of heresy, my patron saint would be Saint Thomas, because I'm a doubting Thomas. But what's the point of going to these churches? Everything that I've heard in the Presbyterian and Episcopal churches that I've attended in the last 20 years, I can hardly remember a sermon that was not absolutely poisonous, that people would be better off if they paid no attention to it. And I had one clergyman ruin my line. I had said for years that I had never been to a church where a sermon was preached on the 10th commandment: thou shalt not covet, because they're all communists. They're all into liberation theology. So no one talks about that. But one clergyman, curse him, actually gave a sermon on it. And I told him when I left his parish that this is the worst sermon I've ever heard, because it's taken away my line. But no, all I hear about is Black Lives Matter, racism and anti-Semitism. Those are the only two sins left. Divorce is no problem with divorce, no problem with idolatry, no problem with stealing, no problem with certainly no problem with bearing false witness. I mean, that American society is simply based on the idea of bearing false witness. Virtually everything people say is untrue. But yeah, I don't expect them to go to church. And as for the pagans, they'll probably get out of their system. I like paganism. I studied Latin and even a little Greek when I was little, and I like to read about Jupiter and Wotan and all this kind of thing. And I'm no more upset by that than Ariana Falarchi was about going into a Roman Catholic Church. I'm at peace with it. But yeah, you have to just turn the clergy off. They're just terrible in every denomination. They're horrible. They're immoral people. They're terribly immoral people.
Oriana, as I recall, she started off her big break in her early career was she interviewed John F. Kennedy, right?
What?
Her big break that made her famous in the beginning was she, as a very young reporter, she interviewed John F. Kennedy.
I don't know. Maybe it was. Probably was.
Well, I believe that's correct. But she and Brigitte Bardot, were sort of, Brigitte's still alive, I guess. But
I read her book recently. She wrote a book. It's worth reading.
I have not. What's her book called?
I forget the title, but it's on the mistreatment of animals. And I believe, as was said in Germany several generations ago, that an instinctive kindness toward animals and love of animals is a sure sign of Indo-European blood. And so I have a warm place in my heart for anyone that is kind to animals. Part of my liberal personality.
That's interesting. It's certainly true that in the ancient Mexicans used to eat dogs. So do the modern Chinese.
Kosher slaughter and what do the Muslims call it? Halal slaughter are horribly cruel things, terribly cruel. Switzerland has outlawed them. I guess they're terribly anti-Semitic and Muslim Islamophobic too, but they're horrible things. And I eat meat, but I can't claim that I'm part of the people for the ethical treatment of animals. But anyway, getting back to this thing, I just think that I don't hate paganism. I think it's going to be. You're not going to convert people to being pagans. I think people need a religion. I think one of the problems in our society is people don't have any religion. You have to have a belief in something above you to have a guiding star in order to organize your thoughts in life. I don't think you can really function well without a God.
Well, we're approaching 2 hours, and so I just want to wrap up with this thought. You mentioned something about the juries that you would like to establish, and you made that comment in response to this order from the McMichael case about the efforts to protect the disclosure, the jury from disclosure of names. I have this one. This may strike a lot of people as a terribly trivial issue, but it's something that I think about a lot. Do you think that part of the problem that has corrupted the American judicial system, court system, is a notion of selective secrecy? I mean, this judge is basically bragging about how he went to efforts to protect the identity of the jury. I am old enough, or at least Texas was behind enough the time, that I remember when I was a kid, my grandfather was on what was called a jury roll. And it was considered a great honor to be on a jury roll, that you were one of the people that would be called for grand jury service in a serious case. And, should we go back to a system where jurors, you were suggesting a sort of non-random jury selection. And do you think that that's one of the problems we've got, is that juries have basically no democratic features at all? I mean, Alex de Tocqueville in Democracy in America said that the jury was one of the greatest manifestations of democracy in America, because the people decided justice. And do you think that's something in a future America we should go back to, where juries are not only not anonymous, and they're not non-randomly selected, and they are considered representatives of the people, as opposed to just random, faceless tools of both prosecution and judge?
Well, that is a very, very difficult question. Jury trials are things that come out of the over 1,000 years of Anglo-Saxon history. Right now, it's hardly matters, but the existence of jurors, of a jury system, at least introduces a small bit of possibility of justice. If you did not have that, there would be absolutely no possibility of justice in the American court system. But the quality of the jurors has gone way down. The right of lawyers to pick jurors has been, or to pick the ones to exclude, that has been taken away. It's one of those revolutionary things that the average person doesn't know about. But judges can now overrule lawyers and order jurors seated. They use this to force them to seat minority, anti-white jurors. The fantasy being that if you're defending somebody like the McMichaels in a case like that, or you're defending somebody who's in the Ku Klux Klan, that Black jurors can just set that aside and be fair. And of course, that's just Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm thinking. But anyway, in Germany, I'm told they have sort of professional jurors. They have people that have taken courses and been trained in how to be jurors. How you select jurors, that's a problem. I think there's probably a considerable amount of jury tampering in America, in which the powerful are able to get the clerks of court to seat jurors that are a jury pool that is very much inclined in favor of one side against the other. In the court up in Charlottesville, 4 of the 12 jurors who were eventually seated were African American. That's an area of Virginia where there wasn't much slavery, and the percentage of African American is very low. I'd like to see what the jury pool consisted of. I don't know. That's the kind of thing you need to devote a lot of thought to in trying to figure out the ideal ethnostate. But one thing is certain: the founding fathers are regarded with sort of idol-like adoration by the American people. They were certainly a way above anything we've had since. But they did not do an A+ job. They did about a C job. There were other people that did a better job. The guy that wrote the first Constitution of Haiti was General Dessalines, who commanded the Haitians in the genocide of all the whites on the island. He's the one that sent the word out to kill every white person on the island in 1803. And when he drew up the Haitian Constitution, unlike Jefferson with his Declaration of Independence or the others at the Independence Hall with the Constitutional Convention, this brilliant Black guy put in the Haitian Constitution that no white person could ever be a citizen or could ever own so much as an inch of Haitian soil. So he got it a lot better than the Constitution. People say, well, they just never dreamed that this would happen. But if they didn't dream it, they didn't have much knowledge of history. And Dessalines was, that's why I tell you, I'm not a white supremacist. Dessalines was smarter than Jefferson. Dessalines was smarter than George Washington. Whites are not superior. In many ways, whites are inferior, but they're still my people. But I would leave you, as you're talking about winding this long filibuster and monologue, this verbal diarrhea of mine, finally, mercifully bringing it to an end for whatever few people are still listening to my rantings and ravings. I would say this, I know that people in our ranks are frightened and they're discouraged and they're demoralized by what has happened in the last several years and what is going on now under this god-awful president and system that we have. But they should always reflect that we are rich. We have something that liberal whites and white normies don't have. My mind goes back. I've told this story many times. It was one of the most profound moments of my life. I've been involved in this stuff since I was 15 years old. I've been involved in it now for 60 years, not in a big flashy way and not burning myself out, but there's never been a year of my life that I wasn't involved in it and meeting people and reading things and helping financially and doing what I could. So I have a long track record. And one of the good things about this life of living in opposition to the regime is I have met a lot of very interesting people, including reigning European royalty. A lot of people. You'd be surprised. There are people in high positions in our society who do get it and do understand it. And two of the people that were most interesting that I have been able to meet were Count and Countess Andrassy of Hungary. Now, in Hungary, the Andrassys are at the pinnacle of the nobility. When the Kaiser of Austria-Hungary would come to Budapest, the Andrassys would walk right behind the royal family in the procession to the speech from the throne. They were to Hungary what the Norfolks are to the peerage in England. They were living in genteel poverty in Coral Gables, Florida, in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment. They once had palaces. I read the New York Times with the fall of the Soviet system in Hungary. Their descendants, who must be their grandchildren or great-grandchildren, have actually gotten some of the palaces back. But they had to flee Hungary. They sent their 4 kids out as the Soviets moved in, and then they followed several years later when it became apparent that the US government was not going to oppose the Sovietization of Europe, but was in fact complicit in the Sovietization of Eastern and Central Europe. Anyway, they ended up in America. And so I told them one time, I'd gotten comfortable with them, and I think they were comfortable with me. And I told them one time, how do you cope with having lost everything? You once lived in palaces, and now you've lost all of that. You've lost everything. And Countess Andrassy gave me something that I've never forgotten, and which I urge all of our people to remember. She said, we have not lost everything, Sam. We've lost our money. We have our family. We have our children. We have our language. We have our country still, our countrymen. We have our literature. We have our culture. We have our civilization. We have our religion. They were pious Roman Catholics. We have everything except our money. And she said, I don't mean to be ugly to the country that has given us refuge, but you Americans have lost everything except your money. You have lost your religion, you've lost your language, you've lost your culture, you've lost your race, you've lost your civilization. So eventually America will lose its money. It happens to all countries. And when that happens, the American people will be the most bankrupt people in human history. And that's what we're seeing. And we must console ourselves, the fact that we are real people. We have real lives. I still feel a member of a community. I went and visited my relatives in Charleston this weekend. I walked down the street that are named for my ancestors. I still have all of that. When I go to England and go to Westminster Abbey, it belongs to me in a sense that it probably no longer belongs to most of the people of England, even though it's a church of your idolatrous religion and not the Church of Scotland. But anyway, we are rich. We have it all. And these people in our own race that don't, they have nothing. And so we're rich people.
Well, that is inspiring. And I appreciate your coming on no notice at all. And your eloquence is overwhelming, is all I can say.
I have lived a long time, and I hate to say it, I'm very angry. I try to purge myself of anger. I have spiritual and meditation exercises that I do every morning. And one of them is to try to purge myself of the anger that I feel when I see an injustice like happened to the McMichaels and see the wicked enthroned. For those of you who are religious, I commend you the 37th Psalm. It was my great-grandfather's favorite Psalm, who was a Confederate hero and who walked 400 miles home to his ruined state of South Carolina after the surrender at Appomattox. And it's a great poem. Fret not thyself on account of evildoers, nor be thou envious of the workers of iniquity. It's an optimistic reassurance that these wicked people will disappear.
Sam Dickson.
Go home and get out your King James Version Bible, read it in our liturgical language and not in the modern, and go read the 37th Psalm. It was my great-grandfather's favorite psalm. It comforted him in the defeat and the misery of South Carolina. We still recite it at family reunions. So I commend it even to the oldest.
God bless you, Sam Dickson. It's been a great evening. I look forward to further inspiring sessions with you in the near future.
Take care. So,
good night.
Wallace Benny.